tariffs. Whether it's in connection with trade partners like Mexico, China, or Japan, we've heard a lot about them lately. And President Donald Trump has put Canada front and center most recently.
And I told them if they don't change their ways, so we have a tremendous deficit. People say, well, there's really not that much of a deficit. Well, they're not including two things, energy and timber. And those are the two big things when it comes to Canada. Now, we have to change our ways. We can no longer be the stupid country. We want to be the smart country.
Will these new tariffs sting Massachusetts? I spoke with Professors M.J. Peterson of UMass Amherst and Chris Mitchell of Mount Holyoke to find out more.
Basically, a tariff is a fee that you have to pay to bring a good into the country. So if Canadians are sending steel into the United States, they now have to pay essentially a 25% tax on any steel that they bring in.
And so this obviously has a lot of people very heated discussions that this has set off, not only here in the United States, but obviously Canada. There's also Mexico and China at play here, so lots of different variables on the board. But when we have these tariffs in place, what's the benefit for the United States, if you see one?
Well, typically what a tariff does is, because the producer always has to pass it on to the buyer, it means that the people in the country where the good is going have to pay a higher price. That may shift their demand then to a locally produced good that is less expensive if there is a locally produced good available.
Certainly nothing new with tariffs. We've had them. I mean, look at history, right? That's sort of very ingrained in this country, the concept of the tariff. We had the Boston Tea Party sort of as a result of that, right? When you look at the history of tariffs, does anything in particular stand out to you as particularly relevant that we might learn from to inform what's currently going on?
The tariffs today are very different than the 19th century because most countries had fairly high tariffs in the 19th century. What's different today is you have a multilateral agreement, an agreement among a large number of countries, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which is overseen by the World Trade Organization, which commits the member countries to keeping their tariffs fairly low and only allows them to raise tariffs in particular situations, which is why the Trump administration has had to always say, well, we're doing this as a matter of national security, because that's one of the exceptions that allows you to raise tariffs unilaterally under the GATT rules.
I would say the other important difference is in, say, the 1950s, if you made a car in the United States, you made it bumper to bumper in the United States. And especially since NAFTA got started in 1995, you're seeing cross-border production chains. So maybe the engine block is made in Canada and the timing belt is made in Mexico.
Lots of parts and pieces coming from
and then
many different places.
It's all brought together to be assembled in Ohio. So tariffs are much more disruptive now because you're disrupting production chains as opposed to just lowering the prices of goods.
And you mentioned NAFTA. We've heard the president speak for a long time now that he doesn't like NAFTA. He wants to renegotiate it. Take us back to 1994, or maybe even before 94 when NAFTA was signed, to remind people about why we even entered into that agreement.
Well, it was contentious even at the time, but there were a number of people who thought that the U.S. economy, the Canadian economy were already very closely connected. The U.S. economy and the Mexican economy were getting more connected, and there was a thought that there would be mutual benefit. Now, you remember Ross Perot, the giant sucking sound. He was afraid that what was going to happen was a lot of manufacturing jobs would go to Mexico.
Which, in fact, did sort of happen.
Which did, in fact, happen. On the other side of it, it probably slowed down immigration from Mexico by producing economic opportunity in Mexico. So one of the issues that was going on even back then was Mexican immigration. It wasn't highlighted in quite the stark terms that President Trump has used, but it was. And actually, net Mexican migration had gone to zero by 2015 or so.
And so what's happening currently is the discussion, the president is bringing up the approach that he is taking. What is this, if anything, as a negotiation tactic? What do you see it as?
Well, to some degree, what he's doing is he's keeping his campaign promise, which is that he was going to take steps to protect the American steel and aluminum industries. And to some degree, it can also be seen as attempting to take a hard line, perhaps in negotiations on future trade deals. But I mean, one thing to keep in mind is these tariffs are good if you're in the direct raw steel, raw aluminum business, but they're pretty much bad for everybody else, because everything that has steel and aluminum in it is going to get more expensive.
Professor Peterson, I know that you sort of did a deep dive for us. You took a look at what this could mean for Massachusetts. Here in Massachusetts, what did you find?
Okay. This is the Canadian retaliation only, so it's the 25% on aluminum and steel and the 10% on the wildest array of other goods you'd ever want to see. It includes things like maple syrup. I didn't think they imported any maple syrup, but maybe they do. Dishwashing liquid, chocolate,
It's a
plastics.
broad list.
It's all, but they're selected fairly carefully for the impact nationally, but they have impact in Massachusetts. Now, Massachusetts, if Massachusetts were a country, its gross domestic product would be something like $456 billion.
$456 billion. Just wanted to emphasize the B there.
Okay. Manufacturing is about $45.6 billion, so about a tenth. Now, some people who work at a website called Business Insider took U.S. Census Department data, and the Census Department does put out this data about goods coming in and out of the country, what kinds of goods, and they estimated that the direct impact on Massachusetts would be about $125 million. Now, that is a teeny tiny portion of the Massachusetts economy. It's like 0.0027%.
Almost doesn't even register.
It doesn't at the aggregate level. Now, when you get to manufacturing, because of the way that about 5 million of the 12.5 million that would directly affect Massachusetts would hit steel and aluminum, and there's another 1.5 that would hit plastics, and they're in that 45 billion manufacturing. So there you get to a point where you're at something like 0.012%. So it begins to get a little more noticeable. But take it down to the firm level. That's where you really notice it. There's a firm in Norwood that makes wire mesh that is used to surround lobster traps. You get the lobster in, you don't want the lobster out. And they export a lot of their production. The raw steel increase has doubled the price of steel because people were already hoarding earlier in the year in anticipation
of this, yeah, sure.
And so they're worried about, are they going to be able to be competitive? Are they going to be able to keep their 200-person workforce in place? Because if they get thrown out of work, you not only have the direct effect of the tariff, you have an indirect effect because they go on unemployment, they can't spend as much in their community. And this is why some economists have been discussing to what extent would or would not these trade wars cause recessions in any of the trade war countries.
Gotcha. So, Professor Mitchell, in your opinion, what should we be watching for in the coming weeks and months as this continues?
Well, as mentioned, the list of goods that the Canadians are retaliating against are not random, but they're targeted. And they're looking to put political pressure on the Trump administration and the Republicans. So what we should be looking for are signs that you're starting to see people losing jobs or having wage cuts and attributing them to these tariffs. So for instance, this spring there was already a firm in Pittsburgh that laid off some 200 people and directly said this is because of these tariffs. And so the more people get upset about them, the more pressure is going to be put to resolve this in some way.
Well, I appreciate you coming in today to help us understand this issue. Thanks so much.